Welcome to the Mom Needs a Moment podcast. We're your hosts, Christy
and Cindy,
co-founders of HER Health Collective.
We are two moms obsessed with revolutionizing the way moms take care of themselves. We are so glad you're here. Let's dive in.
HER Health Collective hosts 4 roundtables each year in an effort to bring together our experts and dive deep into the topics that matter to moms the most. We have found that these roundtables are often our most well-liked episodes by both our podcast listeners and us. Cindy and I really enjoy these too. Each of the experts represented in our roundtables have different professional backgrounds and specialties. When they come together and discuss women's health, you, the listener, can expect to get different perspectives based on their area of focus. This is also a time for the experts to collaborate with professionals from other industries in order to create a more holistic model of care for women. Our goal is to expand our experts referral network while emphasizing the importance of collaborative healthcare. In our roundtable today, we are discussing how to set effective boundaries. And I have to say, this is a topic I don't know any woman that wouldn't benefit from taking a deep dive into this topic and listening to some experts kind of go back and forth on this. We are striving to give you everything you need to know about boundaries from different professional backgrounds, while also trying and hoping to glean insights from our experts' personal experiences as well. Today, we are honored to be joined by several of our 2023 HER expert panelists. We'll take a few moments to let each of our experts introduce themselves and share their areas of expertise so that our listeners can hear each expert's voice and just have a better idea of who is speaking during the upcoming conversation. Going in no particular order, Veronica, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you for having me. My name is Veronica Kemeny. I am a licensed clinical social worker here in Raleigh, North Carolina. I have been in private practice for many years, serving maternal mental health, and I'm now one of the co-founders of Anchor Perinatal Wellness, which provides higher level of care, specific maternal mental health services to folks who, through 9 hours of group therapy, can stabilize their mental health. I'm honored to be here and love working with HER Health Collective and serving moms as they have lots of themes that we're all going through together. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. We're so glad that you are a part of this team. Christy, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Christy Maloney. I am a registered dietitian in the Charlotte area. I have a private practice called Enhanced Nutrition Associates, and I've been in private practice for about 5 years. My areas of expertise are eating disorders, disordered eating, and body image issues as it relates to women.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. We're excited to hear what you have to say. And Dr. Hillary?
Hi, I'm Dr. Hillary Manzik, and I am a licensed clinical psychologist here based in North Carolina in Holly Springs. And my specialties in my private practice are perinatal mental health and parenting. And I actually also do separate parent coaching. I have a podcast called Raised Resilient with Dr. Hillary, and I have a group coaching program for parents of highly sensitive kids who are struggling.
Thank you so much for being here. We know that you're going to have so many insights to share on this topic. And last but certainly not least, we would love to have Kyrsten introduce herself, please.
My name is Kyrsten Spurrier, and I am a pelvic floor occupational therapist, and I own my own practice called the Perinatal Pelvis, which provides pelvic floor therapy and maternal wellness services, mostly specializing in the pregnancy and postpartum bodies. I also do a lot of community outreach and a lot of events geared towards mothers preparing for those stages of their life. So it's good to be here.
We are thrilled to have you all here. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm just going to get started into my first question for you, which is on the topic of boundaries. And we hear this word mentioned quite a bit. It's become somewhat of a buzzword in various different resources that are around business, self-care, even parenting information will talk about boundaries. That's just to name a few. If you look at the word boundary in the dictionary, it is a noun and it's defined as an outer limit. Some synonyms for boundaries are barrier, border, edges, confines. Parameter is another one. as we are talking through the topic of boundaries, it's really important to clarify that we are referring to an individual's personal boundaries, or their outer limits, their barriers, their borders that we set as individuals within our relationships with others. So, will you please share what boundaries may look like for a person who comes to work with you? And what type of side effects may a person experience who has not set effective boundaries, or who may not recognize the importance of having boundaries in their lives? So there's kind of a double question in there.
All right, well, I can get started. This is Veronica. So I think I'm going to flip the question. So I think in terms of how would we know that potentially they haven't been working on their boundaries or are aware of them, because that's usually why they're showing up in our offices often, at least in mental health counseling. So oftentimes they're feeling overwhelmed, they're feeling resentful, they're feeling maybe disconnected from their loved ones. They're not having relationships that are gratifying, and they are trying to figure out the why. And often boundaries is one of the potential reasons. As a society, we're not taught how to have boundaries. Our parents, there was no awareness for them, so let alone them understanding our own. So in terms of how would we work with them, is just starting to understand how the lack of boundaries is contributing to some issues within themselves and within their relationship. So starting with awareness and noticing patterns in their relationships that aren't serving them and is actually not serving the relationship as well. Because the issue is it's hard to hold boundaries, but it's really not serving the relationship because it's not a genuine, mutual sort of fair relationship in terms of energy, input, connection. And so really just starting with creating like the flame of awareness first and foremost before we even talk about how to set boundaries, because oftentimes that is so far in distance that we have to just start with awareness of noticing patterns.
Yeah, I love that, Veronica. I think that's so true. And when I work with parents in particular, and all the clients in my practice are parents, whether they're coming in for their own therapy or they're coming in to get support around their kids. And either way, boundaries are incredibly important. But what I have found is that it's important to start with defining what is a boundary, because a lot of people don't understand that. When we think about boundaries, we think about things that alienate other people. We think about pushing people away, disappointing people, hurting them. And I think it's really important to understand that boundaries are something that we do or that we are no longer willing to do. Boundaries are not something that we ask of another person. And I think that's really, really important. So I'll give you an example when it comes to parenting. And I think we can probably all relate to this as moms, but your child's jumping on the couch and you're asking them, stop jumping on the couch, stop jumping on the couch. And then what happens? We get more frustrated. Stop jumping on the couch. I told you to stop jumping on the couch. That's not a boundary. That's a request. We're making repeated requests. The boundary in that case would be to say, I see it's hard to stop jumping on the couch. I can't let you jump on the couch. I'm going to help you stop. And that's the boundary. So in a relationship, let's say you're talking to your partner and your partner keeps interrupting you. A request would be, stop interrupting. I asked you to stop interrupting. And we continue to repeat that request. A boundary would be, hey, I really want both of us to feel heard in this conversation. So if you keep interrupting me, I'm going to have to take a break, right? That's something that you can do. So I think that's a really important place to start, because if we are putting the responsibility on the other person to do something that they're showing us they can't do or aren't able to or aren't willing to do, we're going to continue to feel frustrated and disappointed. So boundaries are really empowering because it's something that we are in control of and that we can do.
Where I see this pop up a lot in my work are, specifically related to disordered eating and body image. There's often, we all know people comment on people's bodies, people comment on people's foods, and those are really porous boundaries around, just sort of that. And I feel like it's societally acceptable that we do that. And specifically when people are trying to heal their body image and heal their relationship with food, we talk about boundaries, about comments that people might make about their bodies or their foods. And one we talk about a lot are the way you were raised in your family of origin and how you were taught that bodies and food should be. And then, by extension, if someone's parents or friends or anything like that kind of still make comments, we talk about how to say, this is my food choice. I respect yours. Please let me make my choices. Or one I see a lot, and I feel like a lot of people can resonate to, are women, adult women with mothers particularly, that make comments on bodies and say, oh, you've gained some weight, or that outfit does not look good. It makes you look horrible. Those kinds of things. So we talk about boundaries around that because those comments are really hurtful. And then by extension, the kiddos, right? Like if a parent or a grandparent is making a comment about a kid's body or a kid's food choices or that kind of stuff, we talk about really how to squash that, because I know we as moms, we're mama bears, and we'll squash things for our kids maybe before we would do something for ourselves. So that's a big one. And especially even coming up with Thanksgiving, there's a lot of conversations I'm having with adult women who are going back to their family of origin and having a meal, and what kinds of things that are going to be said at that meal, or judgments that might be made, or body image concerns about seeing people maybe you haven't seen in a long time. So just how to navigate that is where I see it the most.
And for me, I do it more, I would say to the individual, of giving them the right to say no. So they're coming to me for pelvic floor therapy services. So they are having pelvic floor dysfunction. And so I think there's this idea that when we go to a medical professional, sometimes that then the medical professional gets to decide how their treatment is done. And I'm very clear that they have total ownership of how we go through the session, and they have ownership of their body. And so talking about, is this okay for you? Is this okay for your body? And really looking also at their boundaries that are not being verbal, because many women just think, I need to put up with this to get the results I want, instead of saying, no, your body is going on high alert right now. Your body is setting a boundary and your words are saying something different. And so really looking at those nonverbal cues of what is that body's boundaries, and respecting those, and just then not saying, oh, you failed, right? It's, hey, let's support you in a different way. Let's try a different technique and give you this support so that healing can still occur. Because if we don't listen to those nonverbals, then we're not going to get where we want to get to.
I love all of the answers that you gave on how it shows up in the people that you work with. Would you all say that when it's showing up within your clients, that it comes out the same way, that it shows up, like Veronica said, overwhelm? I've also heard anger. If you start to feel angry, that's usually the first sign that a boundary has been breached. Do you all agree with that? Or are there some other signals and symptoms that you've recognized in your clients that a person can identify with, that their boundaries have been breached?
One that I see a lot is shame, in terms of if somebody makes a comment on your body or your food choices, a lot of shame in that. And that's one of the first signals that people notice.
So shame being, because the shame and guilt are different. So shame being, I am wrong, or
yes.
what? Okay.
I am wrong. My body is wrong. My food choices are wrong. That kind of internalization.
Okay. Whereas guilt says, I did something wrong. What's the
right?
Is that the difference?
Right. And I think, and I think in my work with clients, it's, we've come to a place that they can recognize that their food choices are okay, depending on where we're at in our work, or their body is okay. But some of the comments, even though they know that, like, the comments can still throw them back into a place of shame, because it's like, I'm just inherently wrong, even though there's distance between, I know that what I'm doing is actually right.
Yeah, I think to your point, most of us were raised to please our parents, right? And that was what was thought to be good parenting at the time. You jump when I say jump, and that's just expected. Punishments, rewards to kind of shape that behavior. And so a lot of us were taught to over and over and over override our own internal cues. Like, I'm not hungry anymore, but I'm taught to finish my plate. I don't feel like I need a jacket, but my parent is expecting that of me, so I'm going to put it on. And kids are wired to please their parents because literally they depend on them for survival. So over time, these repeated interactions can lead us to override our body's internal cues. And so we become very disconnected from that. And so we do internalize this idea that, well, I want this thing, but my parent is telling me I need to do this thing. And so because I want this other thing, I must be bad. So a lot of times there's a lot of shame that we internalize and we don't even realize it. And I see this in my clients all the time, sort of developing these people-pleasing tendencies. And I know for myself, right? I would say I'm a recovering people pleaser, but it's something I still battle. And I think it's really important just to recognize that we've been taught to just go, 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 to be productive, to base our worth on our productivity. And so a lot of us are living in this state of fight or flight where we're not connected to anything that necessarily feels good for us. We're connected to producing and pleasing others. And when we come up against a boundary that needs to be set, we often will not set that boundary and then feel that shame and also anger. I think that anger also definitely comes up because there's a part of us, there's a part of our body that's saying, no, 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 that's not right. That's not okay. And so I think that's something to tune into. And I also think just this constant state of fight or flight that a lot of us live in because of all of the things that we're expected to do, we can get into a place where we are not even aware of what we need. And so that's where Veronica was talking about, like developing that awareness of the fact that maybe you haven't been tuning into yourself, right? And you can sort of start to recognize that I am programmed to just go, 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 like to the point where I don't stop to use the bathroom when I need to, or notice that I'm hungry, those kinds of things.
To our Patreon supporters, thank you. We appreciate you so much. Our goal has always been for moms to know they're not alone in the tough and challenging phases of motherhood. We know Mama Needs a Moment provides this to our listeners.
We are thrilled with the growth of the podcast over the past 2 years. Last year, Spotify shared that Mama Needs a Moment was in the top 30% most followed podcasts, was heard in 9 countries, and had more content than 97% of other creators in the family category.
We have recently launched a Patreon account for Mama Needs a Moment. This is a great way for you to provide additional support to HER Health Collective.
We've set up 3 options for Patreon supporters, each with its very own perks, such as special events, discounts, and bonus content from each and every podcast guest that is available only to our Patreon supporters.
Will you become a Patreon supporter? It would mean the world to us. Dr. Hillary, you bring up an interesting point about parenting and the generation before us and how we were raised. And I'd love to dive into that a little bit more, differences between generations and men and women, and just sort of how these things impact how we approach boundaries. According to the Thriving Center of Psychology, nearly 4 in 5, about 78% of people were trying to set healthy boundaries in 2023. That was a goal that was set. The top interpersonal New Year's resolution people were planning to try prioritizing were self-care, allowing themselves to say no, making time for themselves, spending time with those they want, and limiting time on social media. We've talked a lot about that in the HER community. All of these sound like solid goals or boundaries to pursue, but like most New Year's resolutions, most of us are going to start out strong. And then after a few months, weeks, sometimes even days, our enthusiasm starts to wane and old habits typically return. This same article goes on to say that 65% of women compared to 49% of men admitted to having trouble saying no. And I think of saying no as sort of the most easy thing to think of when we think of a boundary, just saying no to something that we don't want to be a part of. Why is it so hard for women to set and keep boundaries? In your opinion, what are these barriers that are keeping women from effective boundary setting? What do we do about that?
I think there's an element that it's easier to just keep going with status quo. But I think with what we were already talking about, when you're in that fight or flight response and you're in this chronic anxiety response, how our bodies don't get to stop and think. We are reacting to what the input is coming in and we're reacting out. And it's so much easier to just be like, okay, that's what we're doing. Fine, keep going. Instead of stop, breathe, ask yourself, is this what you really want to be doing? You know, I spend so many conversations with moms that it's not pelvic floor related. It's just motherhood related, of just like, do you want to do that? What do you want your day to look like? How do you want to do your self-care? Do you want to do exercises? You do not have to do exercises. How do you want things to look? But they never even stop to think. They just think, oh, this is what everybody else is doing. This is what social media is showing me that I should do. And so this is what I have to do. And I don't feel like they get the option to just be like, you get to totally decide on how your day plays out. You get to decide on how you parent. And so I think it's just taking that time to relax our bodies enough to think through everything instead of just being reactive.
Kyrsten, do you think that there is a difference? And you talked a lot about the physical response. Do you think there's a difference in how women respond to these situations versus men?
I don't know. I mean, obviously the percentages show that, but I feel like the only thing that I think, pull in through women is just, I think we're on social media a little bit more to have that pressure as moms of what motherhood should look like. I don't think fathers are looking at that as much of like, oh, what should a father be doing? They look at social media, but I don't see tons of that on social media of like, this makes a good father. And then I think there's an element of the emotional piece to women that plays a role in it too. They're feeling what they should do, like you said, and they take what people are saying to them a little bit more to heart. But I think that's generalized too.
I think there's a lot of pressure on women too, and when you think about parenting and how things have typically shaken out, I think there's a lot of dads stepping up. And I think there's a lot of default parenting and mental load of parenthood that still falls on moms and women a lot. And I think also women have been socialized to be good girls. And if we're angry, we're bad. If we're aggressive, we're bad. And I think a lot of us associate setting boundaries with being aggressive, which it's not, right? But I think it can feel that way. And again, socialized to be people pleasers. Whereas, and again, I think when we're parenting consciously, we're trying to move away from this. But if you look at previous generations, men have been socialized to be tough. Part of being tough, can be saying no when you don't want to do something, and, to a fault, where there's a culture of toxic masculinity that I think a lot of men are battling, trying to actually get in touch with their emotions and be vulnerable and talk about things that are important, process trauma, etc. But I think there's still a lot of pressure on women and moms in particular to have it all together, to do all the things. And there's also that socialization piece of how we have been brought up to please others and to be nice, quote unquote.
Yeah, I think as it relates to kind of my area of food and body image, I think boundaries around that is what Dr. Hillary was saying is, as women, conditioned to be people pleasers, conditioned to be nice. And I think in a lot of ways, we learn from an early age that our bodies are not our own, right? Like other people get to comment on our food choices. We should look a certain way. And even to this point, we have legislators determining what we can and can't do with our bodies. So I think that is one of the key critical things that, make it hard for women to set boundaries. Obviously on a larger scale, we got a lot of work to do, but I think on a smaller scale, it comes down to what Dr. Hillary was referencing of it might feel aggressive to say like, hey, please don't comment on my body. Please don't comment on my child's body, because they've always been taught that that's bad. People get to do that and you don't have a say. But I feel like, when someone's able to do that, it's so empowering to kind of continue to put those boundaries out there.
I love it. I don't remember where this came up, but it was in context of a work situation. And I had some misgivings about something. And a friend basically just asked me, oh, just stop. How would a bald white man approach this situation? Like what would he go into the room and say, basically, and just kind of own it in some way. And it was just sort of this wake up call for me as to, yes, in so many situations, I am worried about people pleasing. I am worried about making everybody happy, making sure everyone is okay, making sure everything is in order. And if I think about, especially in a work context, in a corporate setting, how a big boss would come in and deal with these situations. That wouldn't happen. It would be, this is what I need, and this is when I need it, period. There's not all the extra exclamation marks in the email. It's very direct and just sort of saying what I need. That kind of was something that was brought up for me when all of you were talking. So thank you for sharing that. And Dr. Hillary kind of alluded to this a few times with how we were raised. And I'd love to dive into that too. So according to the same article from Thriving Center of Psychology, younger generations tend to have a more difficult time saying no than older generations. 64% of Gen Zers who took the survey said that they have a difficult time saying no, compared to 59% of millennials, 55% of Gen X, and just 42% of baby boomers. And if anybody has a baby boomer in their life, I'm sure that resonates, that they have no problem sort of saying, no, and putting that out there. So baby boomers were the only generation, according to the survey, where the majority said they have no trouble saying no. Why do you think this age difference exists when it comes to setting boundaries and saying no? As I was thinking through it, I was wondering, is this something that will come with experience? Is this something that is on the horizon for me as I age and I can look forward to this with glistening, glasses and yay, I have this moment where I can say no to things? Or is it really more a generational thing and it's how the baby boomers were raised and just sort of expectations have shifted and how we were raised in this new generation? I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
First thing that comes up for me is the idea that I think just looking at how previous generations were raised and the parent-child relationship in previous generations, as generalizing, right? But I think we can make some generalizations there. What comes up for me is that previous generations were just less in touch with themselves and their needs, right? So I look at my mom. Mom, if you're listening, love you. She's great, but she will tell you herself that she can't say no. She struggles with that. And I think she's aware of that because of how much she and I have talked about it. I think if her daughter didn't have a podcast on parenting and all the things, I think if you had asked her back in 1990, she'd be like, yeah, it's fine, I can say no, right? Because I think there wasn't that awareness even of what they needed. And they were brought up to just do what you're supposed to do. And I think, for her, I look at her in her life and she still struggles a lot with boundaries, and she'll tell you that now. But I don't think she was even aware of it, like even 10 years ago.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I was looking at it, those numbers, with some skepticism. I think there's a difference between, like you said, Hillary, of, oh yeah, I can say no, right? Thinking that you have that capacity, and maybe you can around some concrete things. And I do think that comes with age, of just like, it's not worth my time, right? So I do think that is something potentially good on the horizon. But I would argue, similar to Hillary, that when it comes to more nuanced emotional boundaries, there's no awareness. So I think it's sort of their interpretation of the question, because I was like, interesting data. So I think the way we look at it as emotional boundaries and everything we're having a conversation about, the numbers would be very different. I think this might come back to their perception of their ability to do it, and potentially them being more like concrete no's, like, no, I'm not hosting Thanksgiving, right? Versus commenting about my body. It's like, very few 60 or 70-year-olds are going to say, well, actually, I don't want you commenting about my body. Like, there was no awareness that you have that permission to say no. So, right? Yeah, I see Hillary nodding her head. So the numbers, I was like making some faces, but I think we teased it out, at least from my perspective. So in terms of age difference, I do think it comes back to parenting. And I think it was just, they were parented a different way, which then they parented us. Again, they evolved and maybe didn't parent the same. But I really think we have this awareness now around emotional boundaries, not always a physical boundary. I think it's easier to understand, still difficult, but emotional and physical boundaries. So I think there's more conversations around it, and it's very nuanced. So I think I'm optimistic because it is more of a well-known buzzword. It's getting into sort of pop psychology. It's, not just those of us who have done the emotional work. It's trickling down. I would argue that these numbers are going to shift. And I think our definition of boundaries is shifting from a little quiz like this. So yes, it very much comes from, I think we are for the first time really allowing ourselves to break down, especially what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a mother, what it means to be a daughter, a sister, a friend. And I think we are finally giving ourselves the permission to say, that has not been serving me. Here's how, right? Coming to the awareness piece again. And that really that intentionality of how do we want to raise our children, whether it be a boy or a girl or however they identify, how do we want to raise our children? So I think there's that awareness and that intentionality in parenting that maybe there wasn't. It was a lot more reactive before. So I think it is shifting, but I think it's coming from these conversations.
One thing I have a question on is, out of the 42% of baby boomers that say they have no trouble saying no, what percent of that is men? Because if we think about from the perspective of, I'm an elder millennial and I grew up with two baby boomer parents. My dad was the old white bald guy in the room, right? And he has no trouble making what we're doing. And my mom, when she was still alive, she was the people pleaser. We're good, we're quiet, we go with the flow, we make everything right for everybody. So I kind of wonder about that. I do think that there's some element as you get older, you just don't care anymore. And you can say like no a little bit. But I do think like even with the Gen Zers I see in my office, there is more of a questioning like, okay, that's what I've been taught about bodies, but do I believe that? And I know even for myself, growing up in a history of watching people diet all the time to, shift their bodies with my own daughter, I'm not doing that. I've decided the buck stops here. So I think that, as we're kind of elder millennials, Gen Xers kind of sandwiched between the baby boomers and Gen Zers, it's like we're seeing what's happening and we are parenting differently.
I loved that discussion. It was so interesting. Thank you so much. This time has really been beneficial on so many levels, and we appreciate you all joining us today. Our roundtables are always so great to listen to. I have a very difficult time narrowing down my takeaways, but from this episode part 1 of the roundtable, what are your takeaways? What were the main things that stood out to you?
Yeah, I really loved this roundtable in particular. I think it's a really great topic. I think from part 1 of this conversation, some of the things that really stuck out to me was this idea of there being a difference between a request and setting a boundary. That really resonated with me. I believe it was Dr. Hillary as she was kind of talking about this is a request when our kid is jumping on the couch, or this is a request when we ask our partner to stop interrupting us, versus actually setting a boundary. That sounds very different. And it's something that we probably need to practice because we aren't used to doing that through how we were raised and just all these different aspects. It's just not something we do, especially if you're a people pleaser or anything like that. So this idea of making a request and it just kind of being ignored, I feel like we all deal with that a lot, versus actually setting a boundary. It sounds and looks very, very different. And that was a good, solid takeaway for me.
That was actually one of the ones I wrote down. It very much resonated with me as well. The jumping on the couch example she used, interrupting your partner, that was the other one. I find that I have difficulty just in the moment recognizing when it's a request and when I'm making a boundary or when I need to make a boundary. The other thing that stood out to me was how we are taught. This was when we got into the statistics that you shared. I think it was from Thriving Center of Psychology article, and how a lot of the experts had talked about how we are taught to override our internal cues. That always resonates with me as I'm working through the different things throughout my life, the things I'd like to change and modify, about how I have become disconnected and how I live in a state of fight or flight a lot of the time, and that it's going to take work for me to bring it back. And it's not going to be an easy journey, which I already know. I've been working on it for a really long time. So that was one that stood out to me.
Yeah, I thought that was a really powerful part of the conversation too, especially the idea of fight or flight and how much it's related. That was kind of wrapped up in our conversation about people pleasing and shame. And I thought that that was a really, really powerful takeaway as well. The idea of shame and how that's wrapped up in our inability to say no and our inability to set effective boundaries. And it's not something I think we think about a lot when it comes to setting boundaries. We think about the anger we might feel or the frustration or the sadness, but we don't often think about the shame. And I think shame is probably one of those underlying factors in all of it, in not being able to set a boundary. So I thought that that was a pretty powerful part of the conversation too.
So many good pointers and good little nuggets in there. So
Definitely.
Be sure to come back next week when we have part 2 of our conversation with our experts, and we're going to get into various different examples, such as how they help people begin learning about boundaries and determining what their boundaries are. We talk a little bit about Brene Brown. Each of the experts give examples of a boundary that they have implemented in their lives.
High five, friend. We've enjoyed hanging out with you. Follow us so you're the first to know when we drop a new episode.
If you've enjoyed your time with us, let us know by leaving a review. We always love hearing from you. Until next time, stay true to you.